Well, all right, welcome back. Welcome back to the It Should Be podcast YouTube channel. I'm Paul Bertolino, and I'm here to do another Ranking the Albums video for you. And, well, this time I'm going to be doing the albums of the Monkees. And I'm actually doing the entire catalog because there aren't really that many Monkees albums, and that's one of those catalogs where I know all the albums all the way to the most recent one. Although I'm actually going to exclude the Christmas album, which is actually the most recent one, and that's just because it's the Christmas album. You're going to notice that when I get to other bands who have Christmas albums, I'm going to be leaving the Christmas album off. All right, so there are 12 Monkees albums, 12 proper Monkees studio albums, from the first album to Good Times. Okay, and that's what we're working with here. And well, why don't I just get right to it?
All right, so coming in at number 12, you might suspect, is Pool It. Yeah, Pool It, which came out in August of 1987. And I was counting down the days. It was written on my calendar, new Monkees album. The first new Monkees album since I'd been a Monkees fan. And it was exciting. You know, it's funny, thinking back now, I was so excited for this record, but I kind of really should have known what was coming because we'd already got some new tracks. We already had That Was Then, This Is Now, and then there was the Best Now and Then, whatever, Best of the Monkees. It had 3 new tracks, and I heard those tracks. I had that record, so I knew what 80s Monkees sounded like. So I shouldn't have been all that excited, but I was, and I rushed to the store day of release and was pretty horrified, not only by the cover, but by the title. But, you know, I plonked down my money just the same, and I took that record home. And I listened to it, and, yeah, it was a really crappy 80s album, and I hated it. Now, there were songs I liked. To this day, even, there are songs that I like. I mean, I really always liked Heart and Soul, the opening track. You know, for an 80s produced track, I kind of like that one. And the second song, which is a Reckless Eric cover, I'd Go the Whole Wide World. I'd Go the Whole Wide World. I really like that one a lot too. And one you would not think that I liked, Midnight. Midnight. It's a very theme song from Moonlighting. You know what I mean? It's kind of that 80s vibe. I like that song. I can't explain why. And so Davey and Peter each wrote songs for this album. Davey's is a really bad sappy ballad or whatever, and Peter's is pretty good, overtly 80s, you know, but it's a pretty good song getting in. Tommy James wrote a song for the album, Don't Let Me Down, yeah, that's the name of it, yeah, and that's a pretty good song. I mean, I was kind of expecting more. I remember when I heard that there was going to be a Tommy James song on it, I thought it was going to be better, but, you know, I just kept forgetting that it was the 80s. And that's really where the problems began. But, I mean, yeah, as we all remember, or people of a certain age remember, the Monkees made a big comeback in the 80s because they popped up, again, in 86, right, with an anniversary tour because it was their 20th anniversary. And MTV was playing, you know, Monkees marathons, you know, all night, all day Monkees marathons over the weekends and things, and the Monkees became a huge thing again. So that's sort of what prompted this record. And but unfortunately, the problem with this record and another one, which will be coming up very soon on this list, is that the Monkees were trying to go with whatever the current trends were instead of just making a Monkees record. And you know what I mean? The kind of record that Pool It is not the kind of record that people like the Monkees would like. So I don't know what they thought they were going to accomplish. And, well, I guess they accomplished what they should have, which was nothing, because nobody bought that record. But, well, except me, I guess, you know. And a lot of you sycophants, all you other Monkees geeks, just like myself. But, what are you going to do? Okay, so number 11 brings us to Just Us. Yeah, that came out in October 97. Right, October 97, and it kind of came out of the blue in a way. I just remember the Monkees were on, maybe some of you can correct me because I'm just going by memory here, but the Monkees were on Rosie O'Donnell, And just like with Pool It, and as it had been since the 80s, it was just Mickey, Davey, and Peter. And they were on Rosie O'Donnell, but they announced on this appearance that they were doing a new album with Mike. And that it was going to be basically like Headquarters. It was just going to be the four of them writing the songs, producing it themselves, and playing everything. And I was just gobsmacked. I didn't think that could ever happen again. I mean, that was just, I didn't even know what to do with this information. So you think I was excited about Pool It coming out. Whew, man, Just Us had me coming out of my skin, just the idea of this. And, once again, wrote it on the calendar, counted the seconds till it came out, went to the store that day, and I bought it. And it was I definitely liked it. Even on first listen, I liked it better than Pool It. Because, it was a guitar-oriented pop album, a little wannabe grunge. If it's possible that there could be a Monkees grunge album, this is kind of it. But, so they're all, once again, they're doing that thing that they did with Pool It, trying to do what is currently the in thing, but it just wasn't speaking to the Monkees fans, the people who like Monkees music. There were good songs on it. I mean, Mickey was the most prolific writer on this album. He wrote nothing for Pool It, and he was just like the MVP on Just Us. Regional Girl was a good song, a good Mickey song, Never Enough. And, Peter had a good song on there. Mike, really, he was there. He was kind of producing and stuff, but he really went light. Like, he only wrote one song for the record. And then they also did a cover of Circle Sky. Like, they did a new version of Circle Sky, which opens the album. That's a bit of a head-scratcher. I mean, so Mike kind of went light. And I think, the only vocal he did was that cover of Circle Sky. So he was back, but he kind of wasn't really back at full strength. His face was on the cover. But, you could say that for Peter for most records, right? Yeah, and they did a reunion Monkees episode, which was a special on ABC or NBC or whatever it was. But yeah, they did a new Monkees episode. It was crazy. I was losing my mind. It was kind of terrible, but it was really, really, really cool to see all four of them back together again doing this Monkees TV thing. It was just something that I never in a million years thought they would ever. Who would think that would happen? Well, it happened. It wasn't all that great, but it happened. And, Just Us. All right, so coming in at number 10, Changes. Yeah. That's, universally, I think we can all agree that is the roughest album of the original Monkees era. And that is their final album of their original run, which came out in 1970. And it was really, at this point, Peter had left, Mike had left. It was reduced just to Mickey and Davey, but they still had contractual obligations. I mean, they still owed Coal Gems another album. So Mickey and Davey just sort of made another album as a duo, and Jeff Barry came in as producer and just basically made the album for them. It was made the same way the first couple of Monkees albums were made, where a producer and some backing musicians created this thing and said, all right, Davey and Mickey, come in here and sing vocals over it, And it's pretty perfunctory, you know what I mean? It's just it sounds like a contractual obligation album. I mean, that's all it is. There's no spark there. There's no passion. A lot of the songs are just lame. The performances are just uninspired. I mean, everybody involved seems to be sleepwalking through it. Mickey is the strongest person out of the whole thing, because he always sounds great, and he does the best performances he can do on these songs, but, he's dealing with some pretty lame songs overall, I mean, the only really great track, I think, on that album is the opening track, Oh My My, which was the single. But what's really a head-scratcher is that there are some great, great outtakes from that album. Steam Engine, Time and Time Again, those are songs that were recorded for that album, or that were around at the time that album was being put together, that could have made that album, and instead they went for vastly inferior songs, and I I mean, again, I think it's just because everybody was kind of sleepwalking through it, and in the end, they didn't really care that much. So, but it shows. And they put it out. Nobody bought it. It was withdrawn after the initial release, and then that was it. The Monkees were officially over. They became reruns, and that was that. And that record became one of the most sought, well, not one of the most sought after, but the rarest and most expensive to buy, to find a used copy. I mean, even in like the 90s, that was like $100 record. And I had never seen one in real life. But one day I was on Melrose in Los Angeles, and I went into a record store. And I go in and I start flipping through the Monkees records. And there was a copy of Changes. Just sitting right, like an actual real life copy of Changes. Like this record actually exists. I've only ever heard of it. It was $1.99. I didn't look at any more records. I just went straight to the register and paid for it because I was so worried I had to pay for it right now and make it mine, because I thought, if I don't buy this right now, somebody's going to go, oh, wait, that's mispriced. You can't have that. I just paid my $1.99, and I walked out of there and just stood there on Melrose just staring at this thing going, did I really just buy Changes for $1.99? Yes, I did. But in the end, that's about how much it's worth. All right, so coming in at number 9 is Instant Replay. Yeah, well, that came out in February 1969, and it's the first album that they put out after Peter Tork left. And, you know, they didn't really know quite what they were doing yet after he left. Like, the TV show had ended, and I think they were just kind of like, how do we proceed? I mean, they intended to continue. I mean, of course, they had to contractually. But, I mean, they went through a period in 69 where they were really going to make a go of it and try to be like a real band. And, you know, a real band that wasn't relying on a TV show. But this album is a bit of a grab bag of outtakes. You know, this stuff that goes back all the way to the earliest sessions for the first album. And stuff, many outtakes from Birds of Bees and Monkees and all that kind of stuff. And it's a really weird, uneven album. Some songs that I really love, some songs I really don't love, and yeah, it's. I kind of like it more than its placement on this list in a way, but everything else that's on the list is just so much stronger. But you know, one of the tracks, "I Won't Be the Same Without Her," is comes from the first album sessions, and some of those sessions, of course, Mike Nesmith produced, and the songs that he produced for that album, including the outtakes, Peter Tork played guitar on. So, Peter Tork is actually on Instant Replay. I mean, as much as he is on any number of other albums, I mean, he's on Birds and Bees and the Monkees, no more than that. So, you know, it's almost like they could have put his face on the cover. And now, one of the songs on it, one of the kind of newer tracks on it, is a song called You and I that Davy Jones co-wrote. Was it with Chadwick? That he co-wrote that? I don't remember. But Davey co-wrote the song, and it was a newish song at the time. And Neil Young, you know, from that band, the Buffalo Springfield, came in and he played lead guitar. So when you listen to the song, there's some like searing fuzz lead guitar. That's Neil Young, just blazing through a Monkees track. It's pretty damn good, actually. And yeah, it shows you where they kind of could have gone at the time if they had, you know, not gone with stuff like Teardrop City, and you know. They used a lot of early kind of Last Train to Clarksville style stuff too, and it just didn't really fit. Nobody in 1969 was going to go for that. So it didn't really sell that well, and the Monkees were pretty much off the radar at that point. And yeah, they were kind of back to the drawing board again. But yeah, some of my favorite songs on that album are Won't Be the Same Without Her, the one that Peter's on. But, you know, Me Without You. You know, Davey's kind of the best. His songs are my favorite on this album, which is not usually the case, but Davey shines. You know, Man Without a Dream, like a great horn-laden kind of Carole King song. And it's just one of my favorite later period Monkees tracks. What else is there? Yeah. I mentioned You and I, but there's also some not-so-great tracks. Mickey is turning in the dreck on this album, the absolute dreck. Just a Game. I want to like it so bad because I want to like Mickey songs on this record because he's my favorite. But no, on Just a Game. Shorty Blackwell is like this weird sort of epic thing with, like, he's trying to do Brian Wilson or something, because there's 18,000 parts that are all sort of spliced together, and it's this bizarre-ass song about his cat, and I could just never get into it. Yeah, so those are the songs I don't like. I don't listen to Linda. That's a lame Davey track on this record, but, you know, overall, an okay album. Okay, so coming in at number 8 is the other 1969 album, The Monkees Present. Yeah, this came out in October 69, and by this time, they had really decided to kind of go with all new material. There's 2 vault tracks on it, but for the most part, this is new stuff, and they're really kind of making a play for it on this album. So initially, the concept for this album was that they were going to do separate sides, separate solo sides. There's going to be a Mickey side, a Davey side, a Mike side. I don't know it was going to be a double album. I don't know what the 4th side was going to be. See, I think the idea went back as far back as Birds and Bees, when there was still Peter. But by the time they did Present, they kind of brought back the idea. And, I mean, from what I've read, maybe side 4 was going to be a band thing, and then the other 3 sides were going to be separate things. But what they ended up doing is they went on their separate ways, and they did their separate tracks, and then they came together and just selected the best ones and just made a Monkees album of just, you know, a normal Monkees album out of the tracks. And, you know, like most of those later Monkees albums, it's really kind of pulling in 3, sometimes 4 completely different musical directions all at the same time. And this one is just extreme in that regard. Mickey's kind of like on a weird psych soul kind of trip. Mike, of course, is all Nashville all the time. And Davey's Broadway. I mean, that's how it goes. And so it's just all of those things running all at once. And it's a surprisingly good album, all things considered. One of the tracks on the album, Pillow Time, was actually written by Mickey's mom. Yeah, I mean, this is a song she'd written probably, I think, when he was probably a kid, and he just had always sung it with his sister, because he always sang with his sister Coco, and they had certain songs that they would sort of sing together. She's not on this track, but Mickey does do it for this record, and that's the song that ends the record. But he has songs like, you know, Little Girl, and you know, Mommy and Daddy, and Bye Bye Baby Bye Bye. You know, those are all good songs. Like, Mickey definitely turned in far better tracks for this album than he did for Instant Replay, let me tell you. And Mike was putting in some good stuff too. I mean, Listen to the Band, Good Clean Fun. I don't really like Never Tell a Woman Yes. It's almost like it's like he's trying to do country Dylan, and it just doesn't work. It just seems to go on and on and on, and I've always hated that track. But oh man, there's one really awful track called Ladies Aid Society, which is a Boyce and Hart track from 66, 67. God awful. I cannot believe that they put this on the record. I mean, since we know now, they had so many incredible, high-quality tracks in the vault. I have no idea why somebody would have plucked that and gone, oh, this is going to be on the new album. It should not have been released in any form, not even on an unreleased Vault Tracks album. But, man, Davey has some great tracks. French Song, possibly my favorite track on the album. If I Knew, man, some great Davey stuff on this record. And, yeah, what else is there? I can look at my notes over here. Yeah, well, that's about it. Pretty damn good album. If you're wondering about those weird later trio Monkees albums, check out Present. All right, so coming in at number 7 is Good Times. Yeah, Good Times, which is their 2016 album. You know, I talked earlier about Just Us and thinking that couldn't possibly have ever happened. Well, here's another album that I would never have thought ever could have possibly happened. It was their 50th anniversary, and Rhino Records decided they were all hopped up on the idea of a brand new Monkees album. Davey was dead, and the other guys were old as hell. Peter had been sick and had gone through cancer, and his voice was shot from that, but they decided they were going to be able to put together a new Monkees album. And I thought, okay, guys. I mean, I heard that this was a project they were working on, and I just thought, well, okay, we'll see how this works out. But yeah, so they got Adam Schlesinger to come in and basically do this album for him. He produced it, wrote some of the songs. He brought in people like Andy Partridge and Noel Gallagher and who else? Different people like that. The Weezer dude, Rivers Cuomo, and the guy from Death Cab for Cutie. Brought in all these guys to write songs, and I just sort of waited and thought, we'll see. And he went in there and basically proceeded to make the kind of album the Monkees should have been making all along. In terms of reunion albums, every album that the Monkees have made since 1970, this is the kind of album they should have made. I mean, it's timeless. It's a Monkees record. It doesn't really... It sounds like it's kind of 60s Monkees, but it's not totally... It's modern sounding at the same time. And it's a record that I thought could never be possible. Not just in terms of them even agreeing to go in and doing it, but them pulling off artistically what they pulled off. And but look how high I have it on the list. I mean, I have stuff like Instant Replay and Monkees Present below this album. This is a great album. If you have heard of this album and really haven't stopped to listen to it or thought, I don't know, because Just Us and Pool It, listen to this album. It is great. So good. I mean, my God. There's one song on this album called Me and Magdalena, which is the one that the dude from Death Cab for Cutie wrote. It's stunning. It's Mickey and Mike singing this amazing ballad, harmonizing through the whole thing, and I cried the first time I heard it. I could not believe I was hearing Mike and Mickey sing together and sounding so good on such an incredible song. My God, I mean, but what else is there? There's You Bring the Summer, great power pop Monkees track. I mean, no 80s synthesizers, no grunge guitars, no trying to be hip-hop, no trying to be, Billie Eilish or whatever. It is a Monkees track, and it sounds like the Monkees, and it sounds like the Monkees should sound. The Noel Gallagher song, Birth of an Accidental Hipster, which Mike sings. Listen to that track. You will just be dumbfounded that there could be a new Monkees track that could sound like this and be this good. But the thing about this album, though, too, is I feel like they really could have gotten 2 albums out of this. Because the way they approach this is that half of the album is brand new songs written for the album and recorded from the ground up for the album, and then the other half of the album are old vault backing tracks that they had never put vocals on for songs that they had just never completed, and then they put new vocals on those tracks. And some of those are pretty damn good, but when you listen to it, you can kind of feel the changeover back and forth between the 2 types of tracks, and I feel like they could have gotten 2 albums that way. One could have been all vault backing tracks that they put new vocals on. That would have been a great album all into its own, and then a whole new one, with all the newer songs right there. But I don't think they really knew at the time when they were making the record how successful this would have been, because it came out and everybody loved it and it sold well, and who knew a new Monkees album, one, could happen, and that it would be this good, and that people would buy it. And, and that's frankly why we have the Christmas album, because Good Times was such a success that, only a year later, they're like, well, let's try this again. Unfortunately, they went into it thinking, as Mickey says, well, we couldn't go in and do Good Times Part 2. Why not? More. You did more of the Monkees, right? But, also, it doesn't have to be Good Times Part 2. Just do the next album in this format, in this way, and just, do another great album like that. I think they could have done it. And, but now it's not going to happen because, Peter's now gone. Now it's just Mickey and Mike. And, I wouldn't mind hearing a Mike Nesmith, Mickey Dolenz duet album. Don't call it the Monkees, but a Mike and Mickey album? I think that would be pretty cool. Unfortunately, we also don't have Adam Schlesinger anymore, and 2020 happened to him, and yeah. So, who knows who could take the reins and make it happen and make it good, but I wouldn't mind seeing him give it a shot. Okay, so number 6 brings us to More of the Monkees. Their second album. Yeah, More of the Monkees came out in January 1967, a mere 3 months after the debut. That's the way things worked back then, especially when you were a TV band and they were trying to crank out product as much as possible. Yeah, 3 months later. I think, the Beatles' US albums were coming out that frequently as well. And, man, what a time to live in, right? When all the best bands were constantly giving you great new albums. I could only imagine. But, so yeah, the Monkees actually didn't even know that More of the Monkees was happening. They didn't know it was being assembled. They didn't know it was being released. They learned of its existence while they were on the road in early '67. They were in Cleveland, and they went into a record store, and there it was. And they were horrified. They bought a copy. They bought a copy, and they went home. They went into the hotel and looked at it, and it was just like, they hated the track listing, like the choices, because they recorded like 30 or 40 tracks by this point that could have been on that album, and they just thought Kirshner had chosen some of the worst tracks he could have put on it. And in the case of some of those tracks, I would have to agree. And the cover, they were really embarrassed by, because the picture of them on the front cover was from a photo shoot they did for a Sears catalog, where they're modeling Sears clothes for teenagers. And that's what is on the cover, and they're just like, we're already considered unhip because we don't play our instruments. Now look at this, we're wearing Sears catalog clothes on the cover of our new album. Yeah, they were pretty pissed. And they'd already started to grow weary of this whole thing where they weren't allowed to play their instruments, they weren't allowed to have any real musical input, except Mike slightly, but pretty much they were just kind of puppets, and they were getting really sick of it. And this was the last straw. Mike led a revolt and went into them and just like basically said, this is it. We do it our way or I'm out. And ultimately that led to the next album, Headquarters. But as much as the Monkees hated this record, the public loved it. I mean, it went immediately to number one. The album it knocked off the number one spot, their own first album. And it sold a gazillion records, and it was actually the very first rock and pop album in history to make Album of the Year. That's right. No, the Beatles hadn't done that yet. The Beatles didn't do it in '67, and that was the year Sgt. Pepper came out. More of the Monkees did it. Crazy. But, and there are some amazing, amazing songs on this album. I mean, what do you make? I'm gonna look at my list over here. I have stuff written down. She, Mary Mary, which was written by Mike, and Look Out Here Comes Tomorrow, Kind of Girl I Could Love, Sometime in the Morning. Man, what a song. But for every Sometime in the Morning and Mary Mary and She, there's Your Auntie Griselda. People kind of like that song. Most people I talk to like that song. I've always hated that track. This really terrible Peter vocal. Peter's kind of a terrible vocalist, and he's especially bad on that track. And I've always hated that song. Love Comes Knocking at Your Door, that's a Neil Sedaka song that's just kind of like, There were better songs in the vault that they could have put on the album than that. And then there's the absolute pièce de résistance of shite on this album, and that is The Day We Fall in Love. For anybody who doesn't know this album, or doesn't know the album as a whole, who doesn't know this track, do yourself a favor, go have a listen to The Day We Fall in Love. You won't believe your ears. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard on an album. And I can't believe, again, that of all the great songs they had in the can, that this made the album. I mean, I feel the way the Monkees did about it. They were right. But that said, the highs on this album are so high that I had to put this album this high on the list. So what are you going to do? Okay, so coming in at number 5 is the debut album, The Monkees. Man, great, great, great debut album. And they recorded this album. They recorded the entire album, plus numerous, like 3 albums worth of material, basically, all just in July 1966. All within July 1966. A bunch of the songs that are on More of the Monkees, part of the same batch. And the album came out in October of '66, and of course immediately went to number 1. And, Monkey Mania was here, right? I mean, right out of the gate. And, as I mentioned earlier, the Monkees were basically puppets at the beginning. They were only allowed to come in and do vocals over tracks that were already chosen, recorded, produced, and waiting for vocals. And that was kind of that. They were throwing Mike a bone because they knew he was a songwriter, and they knew he was a good songwriter, so they would throw him they'd give him a couple of songs on the album. And they even let him produce, which I'm glad, because then we get stuff like Papa Jean's Blues and Sweet Young Thing. I mean, come on. And then those songs like that really kind of add so much to the record and add a sense of diversity to the record, really, and help give the Monkees their sound. And, you know, like I said, on those sessions that Mike was producing, he brought in Peter to play some guitar. But, you know, it's funny, when you look at the personnel on those tracks, Peter's playing guitar, but then so is like 5 or 6 other guys. So, and I listen to these tracks and I think, how is it that there could possibly be 6 guitar players on this track? I mean, it doesn't sound like a guitar army or anything. So I don't know how that divvies up, you know, or maybe they just chopped up certain sections that were certain people playing or what, or maybe certain people, like Peter, were mixed so low. I don't know. But yeah, there's an awful lot of people on those tracks. But I mean, so many favorite songs in this. I mean, Saturday's Child, Papa Jean's Blues, of course, Take a Giant Step, which is a Carole King song, Sweet Young Thing, as I mentioned. The version of I Want to Be Free that's on this album, I don't like much. I actually prefer the upbeat version that's on the first episode, or it's on the pilot episode. There's an upbeat version where Mickey comes in and sings on the bridge. That version I really love, and I really wish that was the one that was on the album. But overall, man, it's a pretty damn strong album. Buries more of the Monkees, I'll say that. But yeah, it's a classic, man, a stone classic. Okay, so number 4 brings us to the soundtrack to the movie Head. Yeah, now this came out in December 1968, and, you know, the movie and the album came out and both flopped terribly, but they're really great. I mean, the movie is really weird, hard to figure out, psychedelic, kind of fucked up, kind of what the hell's going on, what are they trying to say, but it's a weird kind of psychedelic movie classic. And the album, the soundtrack, oh my god, I mean, there are only 6 Monkees, proper Monkees tracks on the whole album, and all the rest of it is padded out by dialogue from the movie and different sound collages and stuff. It's very Zappa-esque. There's a lot of just sort of psychedelic sound kaleidoscopic stuff going on, and then every once in a while a song will come in. And yeah, throughout, there's only 3 songs per side, but the thing is, the quality of the songs for this record are so high that had there been 6 other songs, in other words, a full LP of songs that were the same quality of the ones that are on it, it would potentially be my number 1 album of the Monkees. So the only reason that it's at number 4, at a mere number 4, is that there's really only 6 songs. There's just so little there. What is there is stellar. It's just top shelf Monkees, but there's just not enough of it. But, you know, Porpoise Song, this psychedelic slow psych ballads written by Goffin King, and you know what, Circle Sky, a great kind of like guitar rock song written by Mike. 2 out of 6 Peter Tork songs, if you can believe it. 1 sung by Mickey, Can You Dig It? But then 1 with a Peter vocal, Do I Have to Do This All Over Again, which is an outtake from Birds, the Bees, and the Monkees. And then the debut track, your standard schmaltzy Broadway fare, but it's a Nilsson cover called Daddy's Song. And that has always been my least favorite track on the record, but it's not a bad track. I mean, it doesn't really it doesn't bog the record down in any way. I mean, I'll take it. But yeah, that's another one of those records that I really recommend going and checking out if you've only heard a few Monkees albums and haven't really dug into that one. Go into it. It's really weird, but it's really great, and it was really kind of innovative for its time. And I think Jack Nicholson had a lot to do with actually the way they assembled it, so it's a little bit of the mind of Jack Nicholson working there, right? Right, so coming in at number 3 is the Birds, the Bees, and the Monkees. Yeah, well, this came out in April 1968, and it's kind of where the cracks first started to show. I mean, this came out just as the TV series went off the air, and it's also the first Monkees album not to go to number one. It merely went to number 3. And, well, you know, they were so used to instant success, instant number one success right out of the gate that merely number 3, I mean, I guess it may as well have gone to 100, you know, by their standards. Certainly by the label standards. And, you know, the bean counters, I'm sure they were all getting a bit worried. And, well, I'll tell you something. It didn't chart at all in the UK, if you can believe that. I mean, I only just learned this myself. It didn't chart in the UK. I had no idea. But anyway, so yeah, this is really where things kind of start to fall apart with the Monkees. I mean, when they went into the studio to make this record, they were on a high. I mean, they had just come out in 1967, which was beyond a blockbuster year for them. And they were kind of pretty much thinking that their shit didn't stink. They could do anything. They could fart into a microphone and people were going to go crazy for it. And so this ended up being the Monkees at their most self-indulgent. And all 4 of them went in complete opposite directions and worked by themselves, basically as solo artists. You know, people have said, you know, this is the Monkees' White Album because everybody kind of sees the White Album as 4 separate artists making an album together. And, well, I would actually say it's more like the Monkees' Tusk because, yeah, the Monkees' Tusk. Nesmith is the Buckingham of the proceedings, and Davy Jones is the Nixon McVie. And, well, Mickey is just on his own other trip. Yeah, and, well, Peter, he's technically in the band, but he's nowhere to be found on the record. He recorded tracks for the record, but none of them made it. And, well, it's because they're really terrible. I mean, Lady's Baby and Merry-Go-Round. He recorded some really terrible. Tear the Top Right Off My Head. So, I mean, I understand why they're not there. But so many great tracks on this. I mean, you know, there's one bum track, Davy's really saccharine, sappy ballad, We Were Made for Each Other. Doesn't fit on the album. Such better tracks to choose from, better Davy tracks to choose from that could have made the album. Don't know why that went on there. I mean, some of the choices that they were making at this time for certain songs that made the records, I mean, you think people were doing drugs in the 60s or something. But anyway, well, you know, but Nesmith is at his most psychedelic and really at his most advanced. I mean, his songs are so good on this record. Righting Wrongs, which is like a more psychedelic version of Whiter Shade of Pale in a way, but even more kind of, I mean, Whiter Shade of Pale is pretty psychedelic. Well, Righting Wrongs is the psychedelic version of that. And it's just, I can't even describe the song. It's kind of plodding and slow and heavy reverb and just spacey and just really bizarre lyrics. You have no idea what they're about, and of course he doesn't mention the title in the song anywhere, much like Tapioca Tundra, which is a great track. And yeah, Mike is just absolutely the MVP on this record for sure. And side 1 is just Mike and Davy going back and forth. So it's these 2 completely different planets just going back and forth. Yet somehow the record works in a bizarre way. Daydream Believer is on this album, but it had actually been recorded back on the previous album, Pisces Aquarius. But it had been a single, and it had been so huge that they stuffed it on this one, I think probably just to give it a little bit of a goose. You know, even more people will buy it because of Pleasant Valley Sunday. But really, it belonged on the previous album. It's a little out of place here as well. But you know, some great Mickey songs. Zoran Zam is a Mickey track that ends the album. And Zoran Zam is kind of his, it's his White Rabbit. You know what I mean? It's a similar kind of track. It's short, starts out really kind of soft and understated, and then it just builds and builds and builds and builds in intensity until the big ending. But, you know, 1968 was the year that everything began to unravel for the Monkees. You know, the show went off the air. Head was a huge failure. Ultimately, by the end of the year, Peter left, and, you know, the records stopped selling as well and basically started selling worse and worse by the album. And that kind of all begins here. But that doesn't reflect on the quality of the record. The record is really great. And this is definitely their most psychedelic album. Head's up there too, but this one, I feel like Head is more psychedelic because of all the weird stuff in between the tracks, but this is more psychedelic. Like the songs and the production themselves on this record is a lot more psych, and I recommend it. Okay, so number 2 brings us to an album that I almost put at number 1. It was initially, when I made this list, it was at number 1, and then just today I was looking at tracks for these albums, and I just looked at the tracks for the one that is now at number 1, and I went, no. Things have got to change, man. And so this album deserves to be at number 1, and it is number 1 for many, but I'm putting it merely at number 2, and that is Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited. Yeah, this came out in November 1967, and it's their 3rd album of that year. They were just pumping them out in '67, and well, it's actually one of the earliest albums to use the Moog synthesizer. Mickey owned one. He had just bought it, and he bought one of the first 20 ever to exist. And there was a Byrds album that had this, and The Doors' Strange Days predated this, but this was a very, very early album to include that. And Mickey played it, but he didn't know how to play it, so he was just doing kind of weird kind of stuff on the great mic track Daily Nightly. Now, I mean, as strong of a record as this is, the album I have at number 1 is a perfect album. There isn't a song on it that I don't like at all. I love every song on that record. This has, the highs on this record are actually higher than that of my number 1, which you already know what it is because process of elimination. But there are lesser tracks on this album, like Hard to Believe. I like that song, but it's not great. And I've never really been a fan of What Am I Doing Hanging Around. Most people really love that song, but I really never have really liked that song much. So those 2 tracks kind of bring the album down a bit. But the highs, I mean, Jesus. The Door into Summer, ooh, Love Is Only Sleeping, Pleasant Valley Sunday, I mean, what a single. Don't Call on Me, Words, whew, man, She Hangs Out, Salesman, Star Collector. I mean, this is a pretty bitchin' Monkees album. But, I'm going to have to put it at number 2. Because, coming in at number 1, Headquarters. Yeah, now Headquarters. Really, Headquarters is pretty much always my number 1, but it kind of goes back and forth with Pisces Aquarius, as I already mentioned. But when the dust settles and you look at it, I really can't deny that Headquarters has to be number 1. I love the vibe of it. It has that sort of raw, sort of garage band sort of vibe about it. I mean, it sounds like a bunch of guys who are kind of a little rough and ready. It isn't really very slick, but it's really them playing all the instruments. That's really Mickey playing the drums. They wrote the songs. There's some songs that are on there that they didn't write, but they chose the songs themselves. There's a little bit like Chip Douglas, who produces the album, plays the bass, but as the record says on the sleeve, under the Monkees' supervision. But basically, the Monkees were in charge of this album. This is the album where they broke free from the shackles of Don Kirshner and got to do things their way. And man, I'd say they hit a bullseye. I mean, there isn't a bad song on it. It's a stone classic. It went number 1 just as all the other first 4 albums did, but it didn't sell as well as the first 2 records. It only sold like 3 million or something like that. Poor guys. But I'm sure Don Kirshner was sitting over on the side going, see, I told you. But, I mean, I'll take a 3 million selling album. Especially in the 60s. I mean, come on. But Headquarters is the first Monkees album I ever owned also. It was a hand-me-down. It was at my grandma Bertolino's place. It was there, and because I had a lot of young aunts and uncles. They were like the Italian Brady Bunch over there. There were 6 kids, and they were teenagers. There were teenagers in the house, and they had Beatles records, they had Monkees records, and Pink Floyd records, and all that kind of stuff. And there was Headquarters right there in the house, and that was my first exposure. And I ended up getting that as a hand-me-down. So I think that plays into it a little bit, but I really honestly it isn't just that. I mean, I can really honestly say that I think this is the album that is the most consistently good and the one that's closest to my heart, man. The unfortunate thing is that while they continued to have artistic control over all their albums from this point on, they only were really a proper band on this one album. Because even on the very next album, Pisces Aquarius, while they have the final say on everything and they're choosing, who does this and what songs, there's a lot of session musicians on the record, and they started pulling apart already as a band, and then it just kept going further and further away as it went on. So this is really the only proper Monkees as a real band album, and well, they should have remained one because it's their finest. All right, well, there you go. There's my ranking of the Monkees albums. I bet your list is a little different. You may want to try putting it down below because otherwise I'll never know how wrong I am. Let me know how wrong I am in the comments, and tell me what you think should be number 1. Tell me what you think should be number 19 or however many, 12, sorry. Let me know. And, subscribe. Yeah, and hit the little bell, because now when people subscribe to these YouTube videos, if they don't hit that little bell there, then you don't get notifications. And I don't understand what the point is then. Why would you subscribe to a channel to not get notifications? So hit the bell and get your notifications, and you know when I put out these videos. And comment and like and all that stuff, because that helps these videos get into the algorithms, and that helps YouTube go, oh, I need to show that video to new people, so people can go out, so people can see it. And yeah, so that's the deal. And well, there you go. I will hopefully I'll see you on the next one.